Hello everyone and welcome to this evening's launch event for our new climate parenting podcast, Mum, Will the Planet Die Before I Do? I'm Babita Sharma and I'm your host for this evening, and I'm also the co-presenter and co-producer of this new podcast alongside my wonderful friend, colleague and all-round guru, Katy Glassborow, who is here with us this evening. We both firstly wanted to thank you for taking time to be with us here today to support the launch of what we believe to be a very important and crucial conversation that we are broadcasting on this podcast series. And we very much hope that you enjoy listening to the series as well. I'm just going to do a couple of bits of housekeeping to get that out the way. Captions are available for this podcast launch event on Zoom. You can request that by clicking on the settings link on the Zoom button. If you need any more help with that, Catherine, our wonderful tech guru, is going to send you a link of how to do that. So just message her on the panel link. And well, we want to make this as interactive as possible, please. So for the next 45 minutes or so, we would love you to submit your comments and the chat function, and also your questions as well when we get our panel discussion underway using the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. We are on social media as well: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Have I missed any? We're there basically. So please engage with us using the hashtag #MumWillThePlanetDie. I just have to say thank you firstly to our hosts that are been really kind and generous with their time for hosting tonight's launch. That is CUSP. Huge thanks to them, and to Catherine, and in particular to Linda as well, who have just basically been magicians in making everything work. And also to our partners for their unwavering support from the very get-go with this podcast series. It's been a labor of love for a number of months, but Parents for Future, CUSP and Zero Carbon Guildford, a huge thank you for partnering us in this very important conversation. We are joined tonight, by the way, by a fantastic, incredible panel of guests. They kind of speak for themselves, really, where some of them are guests on the podcast series, and some of them are important partners of this event. But I'm going to introduce them to you in a moment. But first, I think it's important that we just tell you a little bit about this podcast and how we came up with the idea and why we came up with the idea. So in order to do that, I'm going to hand over to journalist, mum of three, and my good friend Katy, who is the co-host and co-producer of this podcast, to tell us a little bit more about the idea behind the series. Katy, over to you.
Thank you, Babs. Well, this series was really born out of necessity. My son Willem asked me about a year ago, "Mum, will the planet die before I do?" And I had no idea how to respond. I'm a journalist and I'm a climate activist as well. And I read all of the science and I know how serious the position we find ourselves in. But when he asked me that, I just had no idea in that moment what it meant to be a parent. I knew that I needed to kind of rethink my role, or how I perceived the role of parenting, because the most important thing I can do for my kids at the moment is stave off the worst impacts of climate change and prepare my kids for a really uncertain future, which I can't even begin to get my head around. So I called my lovely friend Babs, as I often do when I can't understand life, and we started just chatting it through. And this series is really a product of those conversations.
Yeah, and we kind of realized very quickly that there's a lot out there. The conversation around climate emergency, it can be very noisy at times. And there is a lot out there about how you talk to your kids, and there is a lot of information out there about the science, but there was a gap, we felt, in terms of the conversation around helping parents, guardians and carers, what they need to do to raise the next generation facing a really unpredictable future. So that was really at the heart of what we wanted to do. And as journalists and presenters and content creators, we felt like we really had a responsibility to do something here. So that's why we came up with the idea. Let me introduce my wonderful, I say I don't own them, but a wonderful panel of guests who are with us tonight. Please, guys, turn on your cameras and your audio. That would be wonderful. We will try and get that. Catherine, just give me a thumbs up when you're ready to share that trailer, and then we can go back to that. But let me introduce our guests. We have with us tonight Professor Tim Jackson, who is the director of the Centre for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity, CUSP, and has advised the UK government, the UN, the European Commission, and many other organisations, loads of them, Tim, I think, you probably lost count, on climate policy. And he's also a brilliant guest to be chatting about all things parenting. Hello, Tim. Give us a wave so everyone can see you. There you go. Great to see you with us. We also have all the way from Ghana this evening. He kind of goes between LA and Ghana, totally like showbiz, but of course he is. He's just recently been nominated for his second Grammy nomination. He's the international music star and climate activist and the UN Goodwill Ambassador for Africa, Rocky Dawuni. Rocky, great to see you. Can we see you, Rocky? Can you turn your camera on? I'm hoping we can. Rocky, if you can hear me, we'd love to see you in vision. If you can turn your video on, that'd be great. But he is here. We've just seen him. And hopefully we'll be able to hear from him as well. We also have with us Ben McCallen from Xero Carbon Guildford. Hello, Ben, great to see you. Ben is part of an incredible organization, which is a community space at Xero Carbon Guildford, set up to drive a community-led climate action plan. And we are proud to be partnering them for this podcast. We'll hear more from Ben in a moment. Phoebe is here with us. Hello, Phoebe. Phoebe joins the panel. Phoebe is a climate and social activist, a youth advocate, and the operations director at Force of Nature, which is a youth non-profit movement mobilizing mindsets for climate change. The work they do is incredible. Looking forward to hearing more from you, Phoebe. And we have the very brilliant Rowan Ryrie, who is a mother, activist, lawyer, and founder at Parents for Futures UK. Hello, Rowan. Give us a little wave. Great to see you. Parents for Futures UK, for those of you that don't know, are a network of parents that were inspired by Greta Thunberg and the Fridays for Future movement to help normalize climate advocacy for parents. So here they are, and welcome to all of you. If I can just ask you all to, feel free to interject on the conversations as this panel discussion takes place. And just a reminder to all of you that are joining us for the launch event that we are on social media, #MumWillThePlanetDie. And please do, like I said, make this as interactive as possible and submit your questions if you'd like to. So I'm going to start. If I'm Rocky, I'm hoping, Rocky, you can hear me. Aha.
Yeah, here we go.
You look amazing, as always.
Thank you.
I'm really glad that we can see you. Rocky, I wanted to start with you firstly. You know, we were so lucky to have you for episode 3 of this podcast series. And when we chatted to you, we spoke about why we needed to have a conversation about parenting. And I wonder if you can share with the others why you felt it was important that we were having this conversation with you.
Well, I mean, I think that anybody that has been paying attention to their conversations that have been playing out, not only within the local circles, but also globally, we can see that the youth are very much aware of this issue that's going on. And they have had, I think, the patience from the households, trying to get attention of parents. And for some reason, I felt that the parents did not really pay attention to them till they breached the big wall of, invading the sacred spaces of, the United Nations and starting movements that were led by young people. Then the adults started, waking up as to that the youth are concerned, because it's a future that they are going to inherit. And we are the ones that every issue that is going on right now have the opportunity to either take the right road or the wrong road, make the right decisions or the wrong decisions. So their voice is critical, because in the long run, they will be the ones that will have to live with the consequences of our actions. So I think that getting them involved is key, because it will take that kind of intergenerational conversation and being able to harness every voice that we have in a way that can elevate hope, because I feel that hope will be ultimately the most important currency as we go forward and confront this issue. So their voices are very key, and their involvement is very, very important.
Yeah, and as much as we know that I suppose that their voices, I mean, they are being heard pretty loud. I think, Phoebe, you probably agree, right? I mean, you guys aren't shy in coming forward, which is the way it should be. But I'm just wondering how much support you're getting from the carers, the guardians, the parents. I mean, do you feel like they're on board, Phoebe?
Broadly.
Okay, yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry, Phoebe. Yeah.
No worries, Rocky. Thank you for your pieces there. No, so we've seen at Force of Nature that around 60% of youth around the world think that humanity is doomed, and around 70% of young people have experienced some level of eco-anxiety.
And generally, those young people aren't feeling supported in those feelings. So we have inherited this climate crisis, but we are feeling increasingly worried. And not only that, we're feeling anxious about the environmental, the social impacts of the climate and ecological crisis. But
where do parents come into that conversation then, Phoebe, do you think?
So we're also feeling increasingly hopeless and overwhelmed in the face of this crisis. So quite often adults think that the only thing that we are anxious about, the only things that we're fearful about are the ecological, the social impacts. But actually it's this strong sense of helplessness, of overwhelm, where we don't feel heard by those in historical seats of power, whether you be a teacher, a parent, a politician, a business leader. We don't feel heard, we don't feel seen. So that is where parents, they need to come in. They need to be their children, their young people's biggest advocate in co-creating like a future that we want to see.
Well, we spoke to your colleague and friend Clover Hogan for episode 6 of this series, and wow, I mean, she is a force, literally a force of nature. But you know, listening to her, it became really apparent that actually you guys are going to push on regardless of if we get it or not. And I think that was something that Tim, we discussed with you as well, of you know, we're almost playing catch up a little bit with the younger generation who are kind of getting the science and understanding where action needs to be. Where we fit into that conversation is a really interesting one. Tim?
As parents, you mean?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that was brought home to me very clearly in Glasgow last year at the COP in November, and, you know, walking from George Square, where the Fridays for Future had gathered, and it wasn't just kids there, it was kids and parents with very young children, but the anger and the voice and the insistence on being heard, which of course is absolutely right, came from that younger generation. To me, you know, that it's an ambivalent feeling, to be perfectly honest, because there's a sense in which I'm really, really glad for that energy. You know, I've been working in this area for 30 something years, and so to suddenly have a young generation that kind of gets those points and is bringing them to the attention of policymakers is really good. But there's also a sense, you know, when Greta Thunberg turned up at the UN at the end of 2019 and sort of said, "How dare you? I should be in school, thank you very much," and you know, kind of trot me around the global circuit as some kind of celebrity, almost content entertainment, you know, content filler for your prevarications about doing anything, and so there is both that sense, I think, that, you know, there's an anger in the generation that's totally justified and that will create a force for change, but that should never be, you know, for us parents and for an older generation, for government and for people in industry and the leaders of the world, that it can never be an excuse for us not to be doing everything that we should be doing at the moment. And I think, you know, as a parent, when you're kind of crossing that divide and seeing that anger in a younger generation, but also your own responsibility for it, I think that is in a way why the podcast is so important, because those people who are carers and guardians for a younger generation and care for the planet need to worry a little bit about nourishing and nurturing themselves through that process, because it's a hard ask.
Yeah, and I think we also spoke a lot about our own mental health in dealing with that, and making sure that we are on solid ground as much as we can be mentally, in order to kind of help and support the next generation in that. I know, Rowan, you're shaking, you're nodding, I should say, not shaking that way, but agreeing with what you're hearing. Just share with us some of your thoughts on you know, why this conversation is so important with regards to parenting and caring for the younger generation.
Yeah, I fully agree with the points that Phoebe's made, and also the points around mental health and the importance of looking after ourselves. I mean, the point you made, Phoebe, that children, young people today are really scared, that there is a great deal of fear and a great deal of anxiety in not just in the UK, but internationally, and that's very much seen around the world. And there is a real need for young people to see the adults they trust and the people that love them standing up alongside them, and not kind of telling them that there's this very scary thing that's coming. You know, children are being educated and know a lot of the facts, but then to see the adults in their lives turning away and not engaging and not fully standing beside them when they're facing these kinds of really genuinely terrifying futures is, that's fundamentally undermining people's mental health and people's kind of trust and ability to take action. So it's really important that parents do step up and stand alongside the youth activists. And I think making sure that we as parents and as an adult generation are not saying the youth activists have got this, because the youth activists themselves are saying we want adults to step up. So we need to listen to that call and step up alongside the youth activists, rather than kind of saying, well, you guys are brilliant, so keep going. Actually, we need to get involved. And I was just going to also add the point about looking after ourselves is something that we try to think about really carefully in Parents for Future and the various parent climate groups I'm part of, because it is hard. As the youth activists find it hard, it's hard to look in the face of some of these kind of futures and the facts of climate breakdown, and what might that look like for our children is something that's very scary as a parent. And so we try to build in some community is very important, connecting with other people, and spaces to talk about those feelings and to connect with the emotional side of the work, which helps us all to stay strong and to keep going and support each other.
Yeah, and I think this is something that Katy and I found, that there was a thread running through each episode that we recorded, which was about community-led action, which we know about, but also being vulnerable and open enough to share our fears, also share our hopes as well. And, Ben, I know with the work that you're doing at Zero Carbon Guildford, it's all about the community. It's all about understanding where people's voices can be heard on a local level. Do you get a sense that there is still a want there to push forward? Because, it's an uphill struggle, isn't it, to try and keep the conversation about the climate emergency at the top of people's agendas?
Yeah, I mean, sort of two things to that, really. I think sort of building on what Rowan said there, I think it's a lot of it is not necessarily adults thinking, oh, don't worry, you guys have got it. I think it's that adults are pretty scared as well. So it's young people are just way better at actually facing up to that at the moment than most adults. So they're actually addressing a lot of this and processing it and spurring themselves into action through. And I think a lot of us as adults have never really had to learn that skill or haven't been put in that situation before. And so it's really easy for people to just think this is way too big for me to look at. It's terrifying, like not just from our kids' perspectives, but as far as like my own future goes or what have you as well. So many of us just turn away from it and think someone else is going to deal with that. Like, it's just human nature, isn't it? Thinking we'll dig ourselves out.
We kind of thought somebody else would have done it on a broadcast level, actually, to be fair, and we were quite surprised that they hadn't, which is why we thought this is really strange that nobody talked about it in a public arena before, or as openly.
Yes, I think like on the other thing you say there, keeping the conversation going, it's always, there's always something to the news cycle's so short these days, isn't it? There's always something that's bumping off. We've had COVID and now we've got the Ukrainian war, but really if we can actually have the conversation on a deeper level to say, well, what is driving all these? If you look at what we've got at the moment on our plates, for example, we've got Ukraine war, we've got energy crisis, we've got climate crisis, but there's like one common denominator with all of that, right? That's fossil fuels is involved in all of those things, really. So if we can actually have the conversation on a bit of a level where we're like, well, what is the driving factors here? And we look at our loss of connection to nature and our convenient consumerist lifestyles that make us, ignore all the impacts that our own choices have on the ecosystems that support life on Earth. And then we look at the other one, which is an economic model which puts growth above all else. If we could have the conversation more on those levels, then it wouldn't be so hard to keep it at the top of the agenda, because then everything that we look at as a problem ties into those two driving causes. I think that's why we're lucky to have Tim just up the hill. I'm pointing there. Tim is, I'm sure, somewhere else, but he's normally up the hill from us here in Guildford as well. So we're lucky to have this.
He's actually in Florida tonight.
Oh,
he's joining us
lovely,
from
Tim.
his summer residence in Florida.
Please, there on my private jet.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes he's up there on the hill, and so obviously what they do at Cusp is really like in big part of what we're trying to do here. Same with the stuff that comes out of Donut Economics Action Lab, in looking at how we remodel how we live and work as communities in ways that actually benefit residents in our communities, instead of just being for the benefit of a few billionaires, making them a little bit richer, really.
Yeah, I know. And I think at the heart of what we were trying to do as well with this podcast is obviously answer that crucial question of how do you parent in a climate emergency. Somebody's just sent me a DM saying, how do you parent in a climate emergency? In order to find out the answer, listen to the podcast is what I'm going to say. First one drops tomorrow. But, you know, that was the question that we really wanted to find the answers to with all the guests that we invited on there. And it was fear and paralysis a little bit, Katie, wasn't it, that was driving us forward because we just didn't know what to do.
Well, and also a desire to listen to our young people, because so many of our young people are kind of telling us they understand the climate science much better than we do and are talking about what's necessary. And I think lots of parents that we knew were experiencing reverse mentorship with our children telling us what needed to be done, and parents feeling really paralyzed by that because it's just so massive. And when you've got bills to pay, it's it's kind of more of a challenge for parents. But Phoebe, is that something that you find, that kind of frustration with young people frustrated at their parents for just the logistics of like, come on, change quicker?
Yeah, and I love what you've mentioned there about like the most important thing here is to listen to young people, because we are the generation that has inherited this crisis. We're not the people that have contributed to it, yet we're systemically excluded from these decisions governing our future. So the future where I exist is being decided for me without me. So when I get asked quite often as like a young activist in this space, like, what can I do? What are all the solutions? And I don't have them. And the only thing that I can say is the most important thing is to listen to the young people in your life, because we're the people that are going to be affected by this crisis. And there's people all around the world today that are being affected by this, young people included. So ultimately, we are the people who need to be heard. We're the people that need to be centered. And we're the people who have a lot to say. We're in the streets, banner blazing, protesting quite often, but so often we're not actually invited into those decision-making rooms and into spaces where we do feel empowered and we feel heard and seen. So my biggest piece of advice of what can you do as a parent is literally just to listen to your young people.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that's come out from all the conversations we've had. There was also another conversation that we weren't expecting to have with you, Rocky, which centered around hope and being positive, because there's a lot of catastrophizing around this conversation, wrongly or rightly. But I know from what we heard, Katie and I just kind of felt incredibly inspired by the hope that you say that we need to hold on to, right?
Yes. I mean, you know, the thing is, a lot of the young people get their information and news and share ideas through social media and through online platforms, you know, and, you know, there's a kind of a big generational difference too. Most parents too are a bit of that. And then also, you know, using more terrestrial mediums to more terrestrial media to also get your information. So if you observe to the online medium too, there's a tendency for things that are negative or things that inspire fear to be more amplified. And I feel that it's also kind of the algorithmic, the way that some of the algorithms are shared, because that creates more engagement. So we've had a world that literally changed underneath us in the midst of a big crisis, in a crisis when we needed those voices that were actually, you know, because once you remove a human element from every issue, problems have been part of human generations from time immemorial, but it takes the action and inspiration of people to confront that, to be able to find a pathway to solution. So that hopefulness, that energy of we can do, is something that we need to, as parents, we need to carry that to the younger generation and tell them that, you know, regardless of what you're hearing, sometimes this is magnified by the medium or the ecosystem or the echo chamber, or, you know, where you're getting your news source from. But if you are able to, you know, find out what the issues are, and collectively we all work together and connect with the right voices, then the energy of a positive outcome will be what will direct us. Because without that, then everybody just has to hide under a rock and basically give up. And I feel that is what we need to amplify right now, is that that hope is more powerful than the right policies, because it will drive the energy of humanity to solve a human problem.
Yeah, and I think we will hold on to that thought as we can now, I think, listen to just some of what the podcast is all about. So just have a quick listen to this. Parents are decision makers, navigating our families through life the best we can. But how do we parent our kids in a climate emergency? I'm Babita Sharma.
And I'm Katy Glassborow, and we're the hosts of a new podcast called Mum, Will the Planet Die Before I Do?
We explore different ways of responding to the climate crisis, ideas that governments and the UN aren't yet ready for, but children are, and parents should be.
The people and thinking that created this crisis is not the people and thinking that is going to get us out of it.
We ask experts about this generational divide and what we can do to bridge it.
We are now entering a brand new paradigm shift where it isn't so much the rich countries versus poor countries. It's the young generation against the older generation.
Join us as we rise to the challenge of raising the next generation on a planet with an unpredictable future.
Mum, Will the Planet Die Before I Do? Is a corner shop media production presented and produced by Babita Sharma, Katy Glassborow, and edited by Nisha Patel.
That just gives you a flavour of the tone, the sound, some of what we're going to be discussing in the podcast series, which the first episode starts tomorrow. I think you'll be able to get hold of it at 5 a.m. Bright and early on all the usual podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google, all the rest of it. There's a link that Cusper's sharing where you'll be able to click on it and see where you can have a listen to that. I just want to say a quick thank you to Adam at Landmark Creative Studios in London, who designed the logo for us. We went back and forth on what we wanted to say, and Adam came up with that. And I think it speaks for itself. And yes, thank you so much to him, because it's such a powerful, emotive visual that really encapsulates what we're trying to say. And also thank you to Nisha Patel, who has been our audio sound engineer, producer, editor, and all round making Katy and I sound okay. So Nisha, thank you. And I hope that you don't need to press that edit button too much tonight, because we are live, of course, with everybody. Don't forget that hashtag on social media. We are with you on all platforms as well, on all socials, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Hashtag Mum Will the Planet Die. Thank you again for all of you joining us here too. Tim, when we chatted to you, you said something really profound in the first episode, and you said your children are not your own. And you quoted Khalil Gibran to us. I'm wondering what you meant by that, and also why that particular verse of his is so important to you, and perhaps you can share that with us all.
Yeah, your children are not your children. They come through you, but they're not from you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. And in a way, you see, I think when you came to me and asked me to talk about how do you parent in a climate crisis, my response was kind of, how do you parent? And on almost every generation and every generational divide has difficulties in kind of talking across that divide and understanding each other. And much of our confusion around that, around how to do that, arises from a sort of a kind of wrong sense of our relationship to our children, that we somehow own them, we're responsible for everything that they do, that we can control them, we can get them to do whatever we think is right, and we can ignore them when they have views that we don't like very much. And I think what Khalil Gibran is kind of saying is that, you know, we each have our own paths as parents and as children. And of course, every parent has always at some point been a child and had their own parents. And that relationship has probably also been, you know, problematic. And it's good probably sometimes for a younger generation to realize that their parents have been the children in a planet in which they didn't ask that the society should be organized in this way. And they don't much like what they've been given. And so that continual churn of you know, children to parents, parenting children who become parents isn't new, but there are some kind of fundamental wisdoms about it. And so somebody, I think, just asked, on the chat just now, where do I start? What do I do? And I think for me, the critical thing is about enabling children, enabling our kids, and indeed in the same time enabling each other. And it kind of picks up from Rocky's point about hope, because for me, the basis of hope is action. And to be able to act, you have to have certain kinds of skills and certain kind of resilience. And even if we don't know what to say to our kids, we can teach them things that will be useful in this world that they're coming into. And through that, we can learn the skills that we ourselves need to address those problems. And I think that sense of efficacy is really the foundation for me for the hope that Rocky was talking about. And to me, it's always available, even amongst the difficult conversations, even when your kids don't want to listen to you, even when your parents don't want to listen to you. That sense of enabling each other to take the action that we know we need to take is somehow key.
Yeah, and when you recited that poem to us in the first episode, it cut us, didn't it, really deeply, Katy, straight to the heart and hit a chord. I think you were one of the first people that we interviewed. And it was kind of like trying to figure out what the tone is going to be for this podcast, what we're trying to say. But I think you hit the nail on the head there, because, we are navigating something which is completely unpredictable. And instead of wrestling with the beast, it's almost like stroking it gently and saying, help us and we'll help each other. And I think, Katy, we just felt emotional, didn't we, Katy?
Yeah. And also, I mean, to feedback to what Rocky was saying about, hope as well. We loved also the way that you framed that for us, because I can't bear it when people kind of talk about hope in terms of the climate crisis, because I'm like, it's not hopeful, this is really scary. But the way you described it was also how important it is also to be really conscious about hope, also on behalf of our children. There are some brilliant things that are happening. We need to grow them for our own mental health and also for our children's mental health. So those kinds of conversations, as Babs was saying, were just so fundamental to us in our understanding of what it is to be a parent right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a reminder that we are going to open this panel discussion up to those of you joining us this evening. Thank you for being part of this event. Please submit your questions either through the chat function or on the Q&A function on your Zoom settings, just at the bottom of your screen, because we just love to hear from you. We also have in the audience an incredible woman who was part of episode, I've got to get this right, Katy.
6, I think.
4.
Was it 4?
We will double check that. Anyway, Tessa Khan is on our podcast series, either 4 or 6, can't quite remember, but we will double check that. Tessa, I'm wondering if we can see you and invite you to be part of this conversation, because for those of you that don't know, Tessa is a human rights lawyer and represented a number of cases against governments and individuals over their inaction on climate change around the world. Hello, Tessa, great to see you. And Katy and I, we were really struck by what you told us about being parents in a democracy, and that we have a power there that we didn't necessarily knew we had in terms of tapping into it every single day. And Katy, I think that's what we both thought, Katy, didn't we, chatting to Tessa, was where do we go? And Tessa was, just start on your doorstep.
Hi, it's so nice to be joining both of you. Thanks so much for the invitation and for this really important discussion. So, I mean, I think, just listening to what your guests have been saying, and the way that I guess Rowan sort of expressed that ultimately, children are asking their parents to act, because the decisions that need to be made to address the climate crisis need to be made by people who have political power right now, and that is adults. That is not our children. That is the people who can vote in a democracy, the people who can escalate the political cost of inaction on the climate crisis. And we all have that power as adults. And it's really incumbent upon us to exercise that. I mean, ultimately, our governments in the countries that are most responsible for the climate crisis, from a historical perspective, from the perspective of those that have the resources to really act, to make a difference, those are democracies, and our governments are ultimately accountable to all of us. And so actually it's up to us and not our children, who are doing an incredibly effective job of sensitizing us and raising the alarm, but the agency to act lies with all of us, and the actions that are available to us on a daily basis, on a 4-yearly basis, whether that's voting or otherwise getting involved. And as I said, making this a real political issue. The decisions that need to be taken are systemic, they're political, they're economic, and they can only really be taken by governments that have the power to shape our economic and political landscape. So it's really, I think, as I said, incumbent on us to exercise that power.
And Ben, as you were saying, a lot of this starts from grassroots organizations, right? It starts from people.
Yeah, well, so someone interestingly said in the chat, is listening to your kids and community organizing enough? And I think, like, for a lot of us, what else have we got, basically? Like, we aren't in a position to directly influence something, so a lot of us are doing what we can. And I think in terms of what we're trying to do here, in getting people together to start forming a plan together, the best hope for this, best case scenario is we drag governments along at the appropriate pace that communities are setting and that are demanding to be set. Worst case scenario depends on where you see you're going. And for me, this isn't just about climate mitigation anymore. This is the point where it's already too late to start thinking about adaptation. We're in a real pickle here. And that's not adaptation like building bigger seawalls or what have you. That's transformational adaptation, when we look at different ways of living life that can actually protect us going forward. So I think, as I say, best case scenario, we drag them along at the pace necessary. Worst case scenario, we start building these community structures that actually help us adapt to a changing planet and what could be a completely different scenario. So I think it's easy to say, what, this isn't enough, but like, what else do most of us have? It's either sit there and just hope government's going to do something, or get up there and try and like drag them along by the scruff of the neck, basically, if needs be.
And I think that that's something that really propelled us forward in having this conversation, because we could sit there doing the journalism that we were doing, but realizing that there was a huge gap, that no one was doing this kind of storytelling that we were really asking for, which is what carers and guardians and parents need to do. Rowan, I know that you've worked in the organisation founding it, Parents for Futures UK, for a while now, and you know better than anybody else the struggles of getting people together, the lack of resources and what that means, but yet fighting on to keep that conversation going. I'm just wondering if you can share with us any kind of real life examples of some of the concerns that parents have and what those kind of questions sound like and look like.
Yeah, I mean, I think many of us are very familiar with those questions, and often we don't share them. So often parents are sitting alone with those worries and feeling that they're the only person that feels this way, or the only person that's really scared about the environment, or the only person that's not choosing not to fly to Greece for half term, or changing my diet, etc. And it can be really empowering when you connect with other parents and realize that you're not the only person, that you're not the only one that's got these worries. And that realizing that other people are starting to make some changes in their lives can be a really important step in encouraging you to do more and encouraging you to step up. And coming back to the point that Rocky was making about hope, I think being able to take action and connect with other people, and take that action visibly, that's really important in generating hope and in starting to empower yourself to do more, encourage yourself by sharing experience with others. But that creation of community is really fundamentally important, I think, in both enabling people to do more and enabling them to sustain it, because it's one thing to take one action and it's something quite different to be able to sustain that over the long term. I also kind of want to pick up the point that we've been talking about, tackling governments, and make the point that parents have power, not just as voters and not just kind of in being able to litigate or being able to take action in those sorts of adult ways, but we're all part of work communities as well. We're part of school communities, we're part of local communities. So there's lots of different places that parents have power. And for each person to start to think about where you have power in your life, or where you interact with power, and where you can go and have some conversations and start to bring these conversations about empathy, about your vulnerabilities, about your fears around climate and how that's going to impact your children, and start to take that into the spaces where you have access, because each parent will have unique access to spaces that others can't. And so being able to use that position that you hold, and feel strengthened, feel that you've got the right just being a parent and being concerned about climate, that's enough to be able to go and have those conversations in those spaces. You don't have to be an expert. And that's been really an important lesson for me to learn kind of on this journey of deepening climate activism.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that with us. I think those are wise words indeed. And, I think, Tessa, by the way, episode 6, we should have known that off the top of our heads, but it's episode 6. And just to remind everybody, the first episode will be broadcast tomorrow on all the usual podcast platforms, and weekly thereafter. Every Thursday week, you can get to hear from Rocky, from Christiana Figueres, the titan that is Christiana. She was incredible to chat to, wasn't she, Katy?
Amazing.
And Tessa, of course, and Clover Hogan as well. An incredible lineup. So proud to just know that we have you all in this very first 6 episodes of series 1. It's been a real joy to really get the insights on what we really need to do on a basic level to try and help our children moving forward. We are going to open up the questions now to you guys that are joining us. Thank you again once more for being with us. We've got a question here from Catherine, who is asking, how do we bridge the massive gap between youth energy and translating that into policy? Phoebe, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back fundamentally again to my point of ensuring that young people are included in decision-making rooms. So we have these huge voices. We're always banner blazing in the street. You see young activists showing up with their voices in so many different settings, but so often the piece of the puzzle that is missing was actually being invited into those decision-making rooms. So the work that we do at Force of Nature is twofold. We empower young people to feel like they can take action, but we also work with those people in decision-making seats to ensure that they are creating the spaces for young people to take action. So it has to work both ways. And I think that that's the gap that needs to happen, is that we need to bridge, is that intergenerational exchange where young people, they are invited into these decision-making rooms, not in a tokenistic way, but in a way where they are truly centered around those those climate decisions.
Does anybody else want to jump in there in terms of how we can influence policy?
Yes.
Go for it, Rocky.
Yeah. Actually, while within the conversation, there was the thought that just came into my mind, one thing is that change can only happen if it happens with the individual. So first of all, when you look at a household, how do parents create that welcoming household, maintain that to be this oasis where, their kids will come without fear and have an open discussion as to how to do actionable things that can be transformative. Because in the long run, when we have we can have the microphone and talk to policymakers and all of that. But what is every individual doing in order to support any action or any policy that these leaders come to eventually? Things like tree planting, learning about soil, all of these things are actions that can totally help to reduce carbon and in the long run also help in the fight. So let's say Fridays for Future is turning to Fridays for planting trees, where instead of the youth going out into the street, they mobilize every youth around the world to plant a tree on that day. And every Friday, that action takes place. So then you're not waiting for the leaders to do it, but you're circumventing the leaders and using that collective voice as a forceful tool for the future. I feel that, waiting for somebody is almost like sitting at a station waiting for the right bus to come. And when we have an issue like this, probably the one with the greatest idea for the way forward is not going to be the head of the United Nations, but it's going to be that young kid who will go there and plant a tree and inspire all their peers to also plant trees. That is where the salvation is going to come. So we shouldn't look up. We should look around and within. And I feel that that's where the answer will be.
Us parents will need to be planting the trees though, Rocky. That's the thing, isn't it?
Exactly.
We give us that inspiration, but then it's us.
Yes.
So get planting. Well, you're already doing that, Katy. You're already planting away. Katy has 2 guises to her. She's a gardener as well as an incredible journalist. So yeah, we all need to follow that path. Phoebe, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we hear that, and I know that you get frustrated at those in power because they're not doing enough or moving fast enough. But how do you then turn that frustration into kind of concrete action, really?
I think, as is being covered by quite a few of the panelists here, it's about that community action, it's about that grassroots action. So I know there's been like a lot of conversation in the chat as well around feeling overwhelmed, like how can I contribute to this thing and this thing and this thing? And a lot of what we teach at Force of Nature is, whether you're a young person, you're a business leader, you're a parent, it's about understanding that sphere of influence that Rowan was talking about, but also understanding your skills and where you can show up in a way that isn't overwhelming. You're not trying to take on the burden of the entire climate crisis and every social justice issue in the world, but you're able to focus on that one thing that you know, I can make a huge difference to this. I'm not going to feel burnt out or overwhelmed. And I can trust that other people around the world are doing the exact same thing as me, and together that's going to create a future that we want to see.
Yeah, Ben, I think you answered this question, and I'm just wondering, Tessa, if you might be able to expand on it. This comes from Nadia, who's asking, is community action and listening to young people enough? I see so much amazing action from the community around me, but what do you tell your children when governments around the world are still resisting from making decisions that would bring real change and actually make a difference? Nadia, Tessa, would you be able to expand on that? Like, again, I think we talked about that quite a bit, didn't we, in our chat, about how really, what do you say to your kids if you don't feel that that change is coming quick enough?
Well, I think, the most important thing to convey is that we still have time, and we're really just getting started in terms of deploying the full range of action that's available to us to actually tackle this crisis. Every social movement that's trying to do something transformative, whether that's suffragettes or the civil rights movement, that, feel a real sense of overwhelm and hopelessness at times, because there is no precedent for what they're trying to create. But equally, we are so far from exhausting, I think, the tactics that are available to us, from exercising, from the level of engagement, from the full scope of activity that we can all get involved in, from really making governments in particular as the ultimate decision makers, the ones with the power to turn this ship around, from feeling the level of pressure that they deserve to feel. There is a lot for us to do still. So I think that's the most important thing to convey, is that this fight is not over by any means. We are just getting started, and it's up to people in positions of privilege, with all the kinds of power that we have, to exercise that with real consistency and determination. And we will be able to make a difference on a scale that we've never made before.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think we are. Doing that as we speak. And Millie's asking, how do we get our governments to take notice, or will we have to wait until our children are in power? Will that be too late? Tim, we talked about a bit of a timeline on this. I think I remember saying to you, we hear about the targets, kind of zero net emissions and 2030, what's our world going to look like? The title of this podcast, Mum, Will the Planet Die Before I Do? I mean, are we on a time frame here, time limit?
Yeah, I mean, the time limit is, it doesn't really speak to waiting until the whole of government has been taken over by a younger generation. It doesn't, it's kind of, the next 8 years are critical. We have to make the changes in that time. I guess I just wanted to say something about this. Is it enough? And how do we get government to act? And one of the critical difficulties of being a parent is that you're conditioned that your role is to encourage your kids to be good. And in the process of encouraging them to be good, you normalize them into a society that actually isn't good anymore. And not only that, but you're sort of encouraged as a parent to set them a good example, to be the right kind of citizen in the right kind of society. And when society is going down the tubes and it's not looking at its own future, then that normalizing process that you engage in as a parent, encouraging them to be good, just doesn't work anymore. And I mean, I was really struck by this after the government launched its energy strategy a couple of weeks ago, and we happened to be having cavity wall insulation installed in our very leaky end of terrace 1930s home, one of 26 million houses that are underperforming in the UK. And And I kind of asked the guy who was doing it, what do you think of the government strategy? And he said, well, I'll tell you what, the most business we ever had was when Insulate Britain was gluing themselves to the M25 motorway. So the point is, I guess, that sometimes what we have to be encouraging our kids to do is to be bad, not good. And sometimes we actually have to be bad examples ourselves, not good examples. And that power of civil disobedience and protest actually lies at the heart of the political theory on which Western democracy is built. It is the last resort of governments that have lost their legitimacy by no longer looking after the interests of their citizens. And it does sometimes spill over into places that we don't want to be. But actually, you know, that fundamental point of allowing our kids, giving our kids space not to be good citizens in the way that society would like them to be, but actually to protest, to be different, to have a different path. And if you think about, you know, what Greta Thunberg did, and you also have to think about what her parents did, which was allow her to be Greta Thunberg. And that's a really important function that perhaps we underestimate.
Something that Clovis said absolutely would concur with what you've just said, Tim, which is my parents allowed me to be me and to seek the unconventional path of climate activism at a time when it wasn't trendy or cool or noisy to do so. Phoebe, I feel like you want to jump over and give Tim a hug because you were nodding away so profusely to everything he was saying. A thought from you, Phoebe, before we wrap things up here.
No, I just absolutely love what you've just said, Tim, there. And it's about challenging what good is and what bad is as well, because to me, good looks like my parents gluing themselves to a road. So I think, yeah, it's just about fundamentally challenging what
you
we
had those
see as
parents,
good and
though.
bad.
You had those parents. I didn't have those parents.
To be fair, I didn't have those parents either.
Okay.
I wish that I did. And maybe that's why we're all here today, is so that young people like me don't have to wish that our parents are on our side anymore, and actually you just can be on our side.
Absolutely. Stuart's asking, can the panelists suggest how we can best promote this podcast and connect with others both here and abroad? I can, Stuart. Hashtag is where you'll find us on social media, hashtag Mum Will the Planet Die. You can also email Katy and myself with any questions about the podcast. It's Mum Will the Planet Die Before I Do. That's the title of the podcast. Mum Will the Planet Die Before I Do @gmail.com. And please, the main thing to say is download, listen, click, share, because this is a new podcast offering in mainstream media, of which, you know, we're not affiliated to a major broadcaster. We're doing it by ourselves as an independent production company. And I'm proud that we've done it on very little resources and a very tight team. But the point is that we want to get it out there. So, you know, thanks again to our partners for sharing the word and casting out wide, but we need your support. So please just spread the word about this new podcast. And it really is, you know, for other people that might be trying to navigate this crazy time, and to try and say that, you know, we too are here trying to navigate it, and we just want to give that a public voice. Before we wrap things up, I think it's only right that we listen to the maestro that is Professor Tim Jackson. Professor Tim Jackson will be our first episode, which launches tomorrow on all the usual platforms. I think another link will be put forward to you in the chat function so you know where to find the podcast. But like I said a little earlier, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google Play, Stitcher, all the usuals, you'll be able to find it there. But let's just have a little listen to some of what Tim told us in episode 1.
You know, I think there is something that goes on with generations, that they know their future better than their parents do. Even though they've come into the world and they're very young in it and inexperienced in it, and you would think that all that parental experience would give you more foresight about the future. I don't think it does. I think that kids see their own future more clearly than their parents do.
Mum, will the planet die before I do? Is a corner shop media production presented and produced by Babita Sharma, Katy Glassborough, and edited by Nisha Patel.
That is, Tim, your dulcet tones that we're going to hear in full tomorrow. We are just so thrilled that yeah, you were with us, Tim, for that, and we were just really proud that that is launching then again. Just one question that came from an anonymous attendee, and I think this is probably a good one to end our session on today, saying when Kylie Jenner's got 300 million followers compared to what Greta Thunberg does, how do you then get your kids to kind of get up to speed with the climate conversation when, you know, how you do your lipstick is probably more important? Anybody want to take that one? Ben, I'm going to throw that to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, but ultimately we're extremely social animals, aren't we? So I think by far the best way that you can drive behavioural change is peer-to-peer interaction. People want to fit in with the crowd. So there's this, obviously everyone knows about carbon footprints. There's this nice idea coming out about carbon shadow, and that involves how much you actually talk about what you're doing, about the climate crisis, being open, about like what your anxieties, your fears are. So I think that if everybody just keeps chatting about this and bringing it into, you know, making it a part of everyday conversation. I was telling someone earlier, I go to the food going out a date in the supermarkets now, and I get it all. And then I basically force the cashier to listen to me talk about food waste creating 8 to 10% of man-made greenhouse gas emissions. So when I say force, in a polite way, obviously.
You will listen to me.
Yeah. So I think it's just like building a lot of that into sort of everyday conversation. People do fit in with the crowd, and if you can use that peer-to-peer influence where you've got it, then I'm not saying you're going to speak louder than Kylie Jenner, but you've got to start trying to build that into normal life, basically. So I don't think there's an easy answer. There's definitely no magic bullet to any of this, but it's just perseverance and just trying new ways and like going on the hope bit. I think to sort of wrap it all up, I fully agree with that. Climate Outreach have done some great research about people who do the most about the climate crisis feel the most positive about will avert the worst of it. And so I think that's a really interesting thing to look at, is that not only does action breed positivity, but the vice versa, that's probably true as well. Whereas if we can be positive about it when we chat about it, then hopefully that spurs more people into action. I think as parents, we've got a responsibility to do that, because young people are rightfully angry. And so it's really difficult for them to be hopeful about stuff. So I think we've all got a big role as parents to take some of that on and try to keep positive and spur more people into action, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Katie, some thoughts from you before we say
well,
adios.
I think one of the really, really key things that we heard from Tim, actually from all of our interviewees, and Tessa, I've heard this coming from you as well, and Phoebe too, of sometimes to be a good parent, you've got to be a bad parent. Sometimes to be a good parent, you've got to challenge the thinking of the times, and you've got to really feel the anxiety, and you've got to be a bit of a maverick. And I think that's what we really wanted to do with this series, of thinking there's this kind of way to parent, and there's what parenting is, and it's just not fit for the climate crisis. So our true desire for this series has been to really kind of look at that in a really vulnerable way and think, do you know what, we've just got to rip this up, and we've got to make it fit for the current crisis that we're in. And we really hope that you enjoy our episodes. It's been an absolute pleasure to make, and it's been a pleasure to have all of our guests along. So thank you.
Yeah, and absolutely. And also we should just point out that, you know, we are journalists. We've worked for a number of high profile organizations, but we are able to call this very freely and openly a climate emergency. We are able to call it a climate crisis. I just wanted to make that point. My hands are no longer tied. Rocky Dawuni, all the way from Ghana. You know, I think it's only right, given the fact that you've been nominated twice, not once, but twice for a Grammy, that you might be able to, you know, furnish us with just some of your dulcet tones before we say goodbye.
One more time the question. Yes, please.
Well, it was more of a request, really, to, if you could just impart with us some of your musical notes before we say goodbye to everybody that's joined us, because your voice is a spiritual one. And I just wondered if you would just give me just a few seconds of that.
I dedicate this song to you, my beautiful people. My beautiful people, come and sing along, yeah. There are many things we cannot hide. There are many songs that can be undone, just like our bond. Yeah, everything in life is a sacrifice, but I know you are worth the price, so I did it for you. I dedicate this song to you, my beautiful people. My beautiful people, come and sing along, yeah.
Come and sing along, Rocky. Thank you so very much. You know what, people pay good.
All of us collectively, it will take all of us collectively, you know, working along generational gaps, governmental gaps, racial gaps, gender gaps, to solve this issue. It's a human issue. And if we know that it's a future that is guaranteed for us as a species, then we know that together is the only way forward. So
absolutely. Thank you so much. I put you on the spot there, and thank you for obliging, and also to Tim for reciting as well. And I didn't tell anyone we were going to do that, but I think it just adds very much to what we're achieving. So, you know, to Tessa, to Tim, to Ben, to Phoebe, to Rowan, to Rocky, thank you so very much. Just a big thank you once again to our hosts, CUSP, who have been just invaluable and unwavering support for putting this event together tonight, in particular to Linda and to Catherine behind the scenes, who have just done a great job keeping Katy and I technically in tune with everything else that's going on. And to our partners, thank you once again to Xero Carbon Guildford and to Parents of Futures UK for just being with us and holding our hands on this incredible journey. We do hope that you enjoy each episode as it drops every Thursday week, the first one being tomorrow. Please tune in, please spread the word, the hashtag #MumWillThePlanetDie on social media. And from Katy and myself, thank you so much for being part of what is a very personal and just special project to both of our hearts. So thank you and goodbye.